Second gauge geometry crisis.
All right.
Okay, hello, everybody. Welcome to a work session of the Silverton Board of Trustees. It's October 3rd, 2022. The time's 5:03 p.m. and I call this meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Trustee Davis.
Here.
Trustee Pranger.
Here.
Trustee Harper.
Here.
Trustee Bierman.
Here.
Trustee George. I think he'll be a few minutes late.
Yep.
Trustee Barney.
Here.
And Mayor Furman.
Here.
All present except for Trustee George, who will be a few minutes late.
Thank you.
Great. So I wanted to start off tonight's budget work session with a just kind of going through some slides that I published in the packet as well, so people can follow along if they would like. You also have a printed copy of the budget here if you want to dive deep. So I will just start by sharing my screen. And present mode. All right. So for tonight's work session, just a reminder that we're not making any formal decisions tonight. We are only discussing and giving staff direction. For this budget, I put in kind of everything at the max right now. So it is up to you all to decide if we want to scale back or if you want to scale up as well. But just kind of wanted to put that out there, and I really appreciate all of your minds here because one person doing the budget is very difficult. So I would have all 8, 9, 10, 11 of us to do the budget together. As a reminder, the next step after this budget presentation will be that we will, I will make the necessary changes that we decide on tonight, and then present it to you all in a formal meeting on the 10th to adopt, and that is kind of our state deadline to submit our first draft. Any questions? Okay. That was more for the public too. All right, so I kind of started this off with our revenues, so what we project coming in, and this year we've, with the advice of the Finance Committee, we have sales tax predicted to be up 10% from 2019, given our previous numbers in the past and where we're headed. That's a really big one. So I wanted to just kind of gut check with you all on that 10% over 2019. Okay. We also included professional and occupational licenses to be up. We've seen this trend go up, as well as building permits. Vacation rental licenses, I don't think I calculated correctly. I went way too low last year. And so this year I did the 600 renewal licenses times 32 licenses, and that's why it's up this year. Planning review fees we've seen go up. Administrative fees have gone up, and this has gone up because we are increasing our salaries. And so our administration fees are what we charge our enterprise accounts. So water, sewer, trash, mollusk. And that's why the administration fees have gone up. I do want to show you guys the calculations for that in a later slide, so we can kind of go over on how that breaks down and if we want to make any tweaks. And then grants, I did account for some more grant revenue here. I didn't include like the potential Blair Street or some of the ones that we're currently applying for. I feel like that might skew our numbers a little bit if we go over too much in that category. So that's why that one is at 200. I think we did 221,000 in anticipated grant revenue. Some decreases, marijuana sales tax, since New Mexico has gone recreational, so we scaled back on that. And then severance tax, I've noticed every other year it either goes up or down. So I'm anticipating it to go down next year. Any questions on that? Okay. You can also follow along in your printed budget. Here's some personnel increases. So FICA, this is probably the first year in a while that it's actually gone up to 8.5%. See, and then we approved the October 2022 compensation adjustments. So that's a $74,000 total increase for 2023. And then my salary as well as Public Works Director were adjusted as that compensation adjustment that we had discussed when we passed the adjustments. We added two positions really, well, kind of three. So we have we took a part-time employee and made it a full-time employee for the facilities, parks and recreation. So this will give Tadbo like 3 full-time employees next year to get some of these things accomplished that we have on our list. Fire inspector position was added. It's seasonal part-time. So that'll begin next year. And then housing coordinator position, this was part of our grant application for the Zanonis, the Zanoni property. So that is a part-time position and has been added until 2024, basically. PTO pay, so I did put 9% COLA raise. I'm hearing that other municipalities are now going to maybe 5%. So I wanted to kind of gauge while I was looking through this. So we won't know the official number until mid-October, unfortunately, as far as what the actual COLA raise recommendation is. So I just put the max amount that I've heard being predicted so that we can plan for that accordingly. And then PTO payout. So in our employee handbook, this was an attempt to try and get people who have way too much PTO and haven't taken any time off, an ability to spend it down a little bit. And so they're in our handbook, it states that they're allowed to submit in November for up to 40 hours, depending on how long they've been with us. But for a PTO payout, but they also need to keep 80 hours in the bank. Just to ensure that if something did happen, they would have at least 2 weeks of PTO available. And this is the max amount based on everyone's salaries, but I don't anticipate the full 17,000 to be used, given that not everyone has that much PTO to pay out to themselves. And then training increases for the building inspector certifications is also one of the increase in expenses. Any questions? Okay. All right, into the next one. So for general fund expenses, I kind of broke it up. So this is significant operations increase. So line item increases that might not be like sustainable throughout the future. Like we could decrease them through the future, but something that it kind of gives you an idea of what we're increasing in these already line items. So gravel budget, we had a stockpile and now we're spending down that stockpile. So we're hoping to replenish it. And that's why it's increased 10K. We're gonna budget for a new line painter. And this is what I love about budgeting, because this is where like the rubber meets the road here. The dynamics. Kendall operating is up 12,000. This is for potentially a new snowmobile. We no longer have our old snowmobile. Small groomer and a medical evac sled. We've seen that we do need marketing and advertising up. We kind of cut it last year in anticipation of, well, in lieu of COVID, really. We were not really wanting to advertise at that point. We were getting plenty of people in. But what we've realized is a lot of our advertising too is used for like RFPs and getting employment. So that line item's gone over a little bit this year, so I want to anticipate that for next year. And then other things that we're planning on doing is town hall improvements for the front step repair, cornice paint, skylight repair. So just kind of sprucing up town hall. And then we put in 5K to furnish Columbine Park Info Center, just anticipation of that building being open and being able to get that visitor center open as soon as possible. And then also the attorney fees, thinking about our full code rewrite and kind of bumping that up 10K in case we need that extra work from our attorney, or in case we want to look at possibly another attorney to supplement our current attorney. And then for and then our long-term liabilities is Columbine Park and plow blades, and I'll outline that in another slide here. And then operation decreases, we were going to take street washing in-house. And I had talked to Gilbert and he said it wasn't 10K in the past. So we're still working on those numbers, but basically taking it back in-house. Any questions on that? Yes.
$5,000 goes really fast in furniture and art and TVs and like a technology kiosk, even like if we wanted to have some type of interactive media, and we could spend 5K just on the digital part of it. And so I was wondering if that, since you said everything's kind of at the max on both sides, like should we increase that tentatively or even just as a placeholder? We could buy like a few couches and stuff for 5K. That's not a big deal, but or one nice couch. But I guess I was just curious what your thought was on furnishing the space.
I think our initial thought was to get open and, you know, we were thinking in terms of like a couple of display screens, a computer and a desk to get going, or some sort of like long countertop. And then taking a really good look at how we're presenting information there, what that interaction is going to look like. I think it was really to just get going initially and then probably grow in 2024.
Gotcha. I think even just based on that scope, I would budget higher and then spend less if we can.
I certainly agree.
Cool.
Hey.
I saw Jim had his hand up, but I was wondering what's the auction line item?
Oh, yeah. So this year, and maybe John can explain it a little better. Do you want to?
Yeah, the auction line item is, I don't know if any of you all remember Mark Garcia, but Mark Garcia turned me on to, he was an interim administrator here about 8 years ago. And he turned me on to the CDOT state auction where they have incredibly low prices on equipment and material that we can use, mainly equipment, like pickup trucks. And, you know, he was getting a really solid pickup truck for $2,500, $3,000. And we've got about 3 pickups that need to be replaced. And there's an assortment of other equipment that we could use or needs to be replaced. And I think $30,000 would go a really long way towards purchasing the equipment that I'm talking about and getting used instead of, you know, $30,000, you can't buy a new pickup truck even at government prices. So I would like to explore and have that opportunity to explore replacing equipment at an auction. And it's also the kind of thing where you buy it sight unseen, but if you show up and it's a piece of junk, you're not on the hook for it. You know, if you show up to pick up a pickup truck and it's really not what you thought it was, then they're like, well, they give governments first pick. So they'll sell within Colorado governments first, and then it goes out to the public. So they know they're going to sell this stuff anyway. So if we don't want it for some reason, then we can give it back. So I just thought it was a great way to potentially bolster our inventory of equipment.
Cool. Great. Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Tim, did you have your hand up?
I did. Thank you. And thank you, Sally. My comment was with regards to the visitor center at Columbine Park. I agree with Shane and Todd. My question was for Todd. A couple years back, y'all were looking at some sponsorships for that space. Is that still a thing? Is that something you guys are still considering to help with the costs of furnishing that visitor center at Columbine Park?
Can you clarify the sponsorships? We had looked at working with some local groups in the form of advertising or the information on that was really related when we were applying to the GoCo grant. I think we could certainly pursue that again at the direction of the trustees, but we haven't discussed that in quite some time.
Yeah, no worries. That was my question. Thanks.
Where would that go in the, like, if we wanted to add something on the offset side of additional potential revenue, where would we put that? And do we want to put
We
that?
would have to create a new line item for that one.
Okay.
I would recommend.
Is that something we think we should do?
I would be supportive of that. We had kind of discussed similar to like what you'd see at a brochure rack, seeing if local businesses would be interested in essentially advertising through the municipality in that space. Probably requires a discussion of its own. As far as if we'd like to pursue that or not, keep the branding the town specific or keep the branding open to the entire community.
How would we facilitate like is it a big deal if we don't put it in this budget and then we decide to do it and we have excess revenue next year?
Oh, no.
Okay,
So we could put that in other revenues and then be able to break that out at the end of the year and see how much we've received and then break it out into a new line item if that was the case.
Cool. Okay. But I think Todd's suggestion is great and that we should have a work session about kind of the branding and experience of that space at some point in the next couple of months.
Absolutely.
Or run it through committee first and then a work session or something like that.
All right. All right. We good on this one? All right, moving on. All right, and so then I broke this out as like significant program increases because this will be kind of one-time thing. So Kendall Deck, we have in there for 120,000. We did not get that done this year, unfortunately, so we are anticipating getting it done next year. And this will be coming before the Parks and Rec Committee here soon on kind of next steps for the Kendall Deck. We also did a grant match, so in anticipation of potentially the Blair Street grant, we put in 500, and then I put in kind of a buffer so that I wouldn't have to ask for a outside of the budget appropriation in case a good opportunity came for us. So that buffer is, you know, in the 87,000 kind of realm. We do have a match that we are committed to is the 13,500. And that's for our total 27,000 that we'll be doing our development code and update. So we've committed to that with CPS right now, and that is why that's in there. Affordable housing, so I put in 20K. This is kind of what we had committed for our Zanoni grant as well. So thinking about our phase 1 and our phase 2, we put in 20,000 for that. And then CIP, so our capital improvements program, we currently have 25,000 in there. This is in anticipation of contributing to that capital improvements program, potentially another 25,000. And then refuse fund transfer. So it is in the negative right now. And after talking to a couple of my advisors, the best thing to do is to transfer the general fund money over, this is their recommendation, but to transfer from the general fund over to the refuse fund, that 51,000 that we are in the deficit right now. And then later slides, I'll show you on kind of the plan to move forward with that fund since it has not been sustainable.
Should we be budgeting more in the affordable housing line item under the assumption that there's some mediation needed? Or would we not be planning to do that next year? Because if we get our phase 1 and phase 2 or phase 3, isn't there a time period with which we have to do remediation or get a new phase 3 closer to the date that we do the remediation?
Okay.
I'm not positive. That's something we could look into.
Mhm. I can look into that.
And then similarly, do we need to budget anything additional for the goal to break ground on the first 12 units over on the Anvil side?
And hopefully, all of that will balance out is our goal. Anthony and I have been working on how to facilitate that, and we're hoping that it will balance out. Now, how that will work was with the department, well, if we get our Department of Housing grant for the pads, and then the Department of Housing grant again for the gap funding, we're hoping that through that it will balance out. So, but I do appreciate that, and I will look into kind of the timelines for the
Environmental stuff.
yeah.
I had kind of the same question on the housing expense. Shane brought up as it relates to the Zanoni property or that project, but I'm wondering if we have anywhere else in the budget or if this is the place to talk about it. A way to mark, like potentially there's another land opportunity or something that's not on our radar right now. Is that something that we should potentially talk about now? Or are we really just wanting to focus in on the Anvil project?
I mean, we can certainly discuss it. I don't want to inhibit any discussion.
Has there been any update on the conversation with CDOT about their property?
No, there's no update on that one yet.
I think that's a really great point by Sally, that having some type of kind of land banking budget, at least to consider, would be good.
I think even if it's somewhat nominal at this point, if that's just it's identified so much throughout the community in so many ways to try to prioritize housing, that looking at these numbers, 20,000 for housing just seems like not the number in terms of where it ranks in priority.
And
even though I know that that's matched with lots of other funding and lots of other grants, and that's not technically the number, but I don't know. Something to kind of keep us moving forward.
Would that be include so is the 8650 that's extra in the grant match? Is that would be specific to grant matches versus just a part of the general fund?
So that would be specific for grant matches. And if an opportunity came up where we had to match up to 86,000, then we could take it from that fund, and potentially that could be for affordable housing or whatever that opportunity was. But I can certainly look into increasing that budget. I just want to be mindful of why we're increasing it. Like every line item, I try and mark out everything that I anticipate in that line item. So we can definitely increase it. I just was kind of curious where the priority would be on that increase.
Well, and I think as I was looking at a lot of this, just using the lens of the master plan and like the strategies that were recommended in there, and just kind of checking, okay, like we can get into all, we can line item, and I already did this in the finance committee of every single detail, but like stepping back and saying, okay, this is our budget. We've seen increases in revenues. We're wanting to spend down some of our funds responsibly. Are we putting our money to the top priorities from our master plan? And I think that's just kind of like a strategic gut check question for all of us is, to Sally's point, like, is the 20,000, obviously we're spending more on housing as a town because we're managing more money related to housing, but is that the right number? I was thinking back a lot to stuff that falls under Parks and Rec and trails and Kendall stuff. And, I mean, we have Kendall kind of in here, but we don't really have any money allotted for what comes out of the master planning process at all. And I think there's low hanging fruit there. And so I don't know, I just checking if we may have some line items that we may say, we think we need to put this in because it really relates to the stuff that came out in the master plan. So that's not a specific comment. It's a general comment, I guess, as we're talking.
I think something that I'm kind of struggling with conceptually is like, there are all the things that we might do, and we understand that a lot of these things might not happen. And I'm trying to figure out, and I'd love to know your thoughts on how we decide what to put in versus what we know is kind of contingent that can be moved elsewhere. So for example, the $500,000 Blair Street grant match is pretty contingent on A, receiving a grant, and B, deciding that it's the top priority at the time. Whereas like if you were to say right now, it would take $150,000 to buy another, 3 or 4 acres of land in town that's immediately available. I think it would be an interesting conversation to say like, well, do we keep that $500,000 Blair Street grant match or do we buy the land? And I mean, that's the thing that I could see us trading on. And so I don't know how to reflect it in the budget. Best way.
I don't know if I have an answer for that.
Okay.
It's really about kind of, I mean, getting priorities from you all. So one of the priorities I hear is affordable housing. And so, the budget is the largest policy document that will pass. And if we don't have adequate money in affordable housing, then are we actually prioritizing it? So that's really where I come to you all for that prioritization.
And I think you're right that we're going to bump up against competing priorities, right? You look at the master plan, we don't have the money or the staff or the time or the space or whatever to do all of it. And that's why we come up against it. $500,000 could bring economic diversification and revitalization, and both things could fit our master plan. So the master plan doesn't always tell us how to make those trade-offs because they both could fit.
And if it helps, I mean, this year we spent 90 some thousand on affordable housing to purchase that land. So potentially we wouldn't do that every single year, because then we'd have to, I mean, at one point we have to like actually deal with the land.
So I guess the specific version of my question is, for contingent line items, how do we indicate that they're contingent? And then add other contingencies that we know we can't say yes to both, but we want to make sure that there's like kind of
you can footnote a line item. Just footnote it and say, this line item is contingent on receiving this grant. Otherwise, it can be moved to line, whatever the other line is. We've done that with some budgets. So.
I mean, I would recommend that we put that footnote on the Blair Street and say, if we're not awarded the grant, or if we choose not to move forward, that should move over into either land acquisition or the actual development of housing. And I agree about what you just said about we're not going to buy land every year forever, but I think there's a good chance that we buy land every year for the next few years until it's kind of tapped out. And then we kind of switch into development mode.
Okay.
Hopefully we can be doing projects the whole time, but at some point there won't be any land left to buy. Other thoughts on that footnote on Blair Street? That idea?
It's a pretty large sum that's takes away from a lot of other things if we go that route. Not takes away.
I think if we get that grant, we're gonna really be in the hot seat for making some tough decisions. And Dana's right. There will be ways of looking at it, from all perspectives, including the master plan, that create, good arguments on both sides. So but I do think, to Shane's point, if there's footnoting that's available, or if there's a way to just indicate, that this is contingent, and it's contingent on, deciding that that's the direction we want to go, may help us analyze those decisions as we are presented with them, if we get to be presented with those decisions. And I just think we've just done so much work around housing, and that's such a clear priority for the community that I would support finding a way to fund that in our budget in a way that allows us to be as flexible and well positioned if and when that time comes for us in the coming year, because I don't think we're done.
And that too, I think I'll need help with prioritization if we do start bumping that line item up, and what else do we bump down? Because I have put this at the max to the point where we would spend down our fund balance significantly next year. And I'll be honest, this year we haven't spent it down as much as I had projected that we would. So potentially it would be a lot larger next year as well. Any other discussion on that? Are you all okay with me putting in a contingency on the grant match line item
I guess
for affordable housing?
one other question I had on this, if all the things go well in becoming a certified local government, does this entire grant match section go away?
Oh, so certified local government would only be for the restoration of buildings, like of historic buildings.
Got it.
So no, it wouldn't.
Okay.
Yep. And then there is the DOLA match available, but that would probably just be for one. We're still getting information on what exactly that would be for. But water and sewer is high on the list. And broadband.
Do aspects of the Blair Street project constitute water and sewer that would make some of the match eligible?
No. As far as what I've read, it's more of like, a sewer plant, water infrastructure, and then, broadband infrastructure specifically.
I have a quick question. Can you combine affordable housing and land acquisition if it's earmarked for affordable housing, so that if you have a better opportunity to acquire land for affordable housing, then actually put it into physical structure or infrastructure? Could you do that?
Yes, I could. Okay. So just to kind of review our long-term financial commitments, and this doesn't include our Kubota, which we're still getting prices on. But this is kind of everything else, and including the Columbine and the plow blades that we have just agreed upon. Any questions on our long-term debts? And not all of this comes out of the general fund, I should say. Two of these come out of our water fund.
And just to clarify, so for Columbine Park, you moved it out of our line items under general fund for the budgeting and put it into our.
Correct, correct. Okay, so this is one fund. I'm jumping ahead. I had them all like in line with your budget, but this is one that I really wanted to talk to you all first, is our refuse fund. So last year, and this has been, I think it's because we have been, we had a 15% or a 7% increase this year to our service with Bruin. And then it has gone into the black or into the red. in 2021 and was projected for 2022 to go even further into the red. So in order to get that back into the black, we need to transfer that $51,785 from the general fund balance to this fund to get it back to sustainable. Then these two options at the top here are something that we want to present to the finance committee on the 17th, and that's raising residential base rate 15%, and then implementing a business EQR adjustment. So right now, the businesses pay a tipping fee to empty their, if they have a dumpster, but the actual contents of that dumpster, we still pay to get hauled out of here. So we've been coming up with a formula to make it a little bit more fair so we can recover our costs on our end. And with those two, we think that we can start climbing again out of the red. Any questions on this one? Oh, also not charging. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Also not charging an admin fee for 2023 to give this fund a chance to recover. And the admin fee is around 20,000. So it's already in your budget that it's reduced in our admin fee and revenues. So you can kind of see what it would look like if all went well.
Did the tagging system make a difference in collections for the refuse fund?
And I think it might be too soon to tell at this point. I know that, like, Matt, would you say gut feeling? But Matt's only been here a year, so I think it's pretty much too soon to tell. At the end of this year, we'll be able to kind of do a really good comparison to see if we've recovered some costs that way. But it has been working. We have been receiving invoices from Bruin. It was a little bit of a training moment there, but I think we're at a point where we're getting our invoices based off of those tags. Any other questions on this one? So as I was talking about, like taking away that administration fee for the refuse fund in order for it to recover, this is how our administration fee is calculated. So right now we have, and this is the part that kind of is a little funky, and I just want to like put that out there, is that in our budget, how it's separated out. So you have like, let's use the events coordinator, because that's one that's an issue right now. So if you go to the communications and events coordinator, you'll see that there's $10,000 in their personnel line item that is allocated for summer sounds. But this formula uses all of that. So it uses everything in that section of the events and communications coordinator in order to calculate this. I think a more fair calculation would be using just what is associated with that personnel cost. So that would include their salary, it would include their FICA, Social Security, retirement, unemployment insurance, even their training and professional services, like those together. But then any kind of program base, I would like to separate out from that and potentially reduce this. Now, we don't have to do this year. It's just something that kind of bothers me about the way this is calculated, and maybe too, looking at our percentage of time allocated to each of these funds as well. So kind of wanted to throw that out there as a potential issue down the road. I'm not sure if it's something we want to solve this year, but something that just to keep in mind as we're charging these fees to these enterprise funds, that they're not exactly like based off of the time, they're based off of that chunk of line item. Does that make sense? Okay. There's more of awareness right now. I will hopefully come up with a great system and present it to you all as a fix. But I haven't got there yet. And then talking about the sewer fund, and this graph looks a little bit skewed because we had planned on spending down our 2020 budget a little bit. I'm not, like, we won't know exactly where we're at until December. But basically we are spending down that fund balance a little bit. So we were hoping that we can do a rate study. We had budgeted for this year, but it looks like it's not going to happen until next year. And that will hopefully help us kind of recover our costs. So potentially another, so thinking about it too, refuse, we're raising potentially 15%. And then we're probably going to have to look at our water and sewer and raise those as well in the coming years to make sure that we are more sustainable and actually growing those funds a little bit so we can pay for big infrastructure projects.
I think that comes up a lot, you know, I mean, you look even just on Facebook, people are saying what capital improvements we should do. And people say, well, water and sewer. And it's like, well, yeah, that's on our radar. That's not what we're talking about here. But I think it's just a really important thing. I know it's in your mind. I know it's on your mind. And so making sure that we're keeping those funds healthy enough to fund whatever we're going to need in the future. If building permits are doubling every year, like we got to keep up with our infrastructure.
Yeah, and one thing we did do in sewer, was it sewer fund or water fund where we separated out the tap fee cost? Because we had been lumping it into operations and maintenance, but realizing that it's really its own beast. So taking it out from operations and maintenance and putting it in its separate line item.
Did you put that in a separate line? I know we talked about it in our bid budget.
I think it is.
Funds. Okay, good.
Yep.
Good. I mean, especially because now we're going from 4 or 5 taps to 15. That's a lot more revenue coming in, but there's no place to, I mean, you have a big tap fees, but it still costs a fair amount of money to install them. And so if I'm classifying, well, copper costs a fortune now. And where do I classify it? You know, distribution, maintenance is not a line item for tap. It's a different thing. So to show that balance better, we need to have those line items added. And I'd add on the utility rates. We haven't done a utility rate adjustment since 2017. And then it wasn't much of one. It was really based upon usage. So I know we need good data before we just say, okay, we're going to raise rates. We may not need to raise rates, but we need to have good data to do that. And when you look at the cost of replacing a sewer plant, in all likelihood, with the amount of ratepayers that we have, we will have to raise the rates. So just be prepared for that in the future, but we'll put together the data first so that we have a good argument to do that.
And going on to the water fund, we did do, so in the sewer fund, we did have a grant placeholder as well. And then in the water fund, we put one as well. And then the gravel increases that we talked about, and then 2 fire hydrants next year we're going to install.
Can I ask a quick question? So in the water and sewer for those grant placeholders and then the 2022 budgeted and 2023 budgeted, with those funds going down, does that assume spending those grant placeholders? Like, okay, so the water fund says a $200,000 revenue placeholder for grants. So does the 2023 budgeted bar there, the orange one on your slides, does that assume that we spend that $200,000
Yes.
placeholder revenue?
Yes, and I want to just make sure that that's correct, though. Just one sec. It should is the answer. Spent it. Yeah, so we did spend it. So we put a grants line item and we added this line item actually to our water fund to show the grants that we've spent versus the grants coming in, so that will balance out. Don't want to assume anything with spreadsheets. It hides and deletes things. Okay. And then going into cemetery fund, so this was increased and potentially going into the fund balance. for a new fence. So we didn't, I don't think we spent the money that we had in there that we were going to spend. But we potentially might with we need a new, what is it called? A new cemetery, where you lift or where you put the
That's a casket lowering.
casket lowering device. So we potentially might still need to buy that, but we will know more after this vote if the cemetery committee would like to spend those funds on a new fence or not.
Did we
And
get
I'm-
community feedback on the fence there?
Yep, and that is open until October 12th.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, you keep saying that. Just still wondering.
We haven't opened the box yet.
Copy that.
And then Willis Park, this is a very healthy fund, and we're planning on some new improvements here, as far as getting a shed for the Colorado Trail boxes that are coming in, fixing our shower room. We've got a couple issues with the shower room, and so that's why it went up 35,000 to 45,000 in anticipation of those extra projects that we potentially will be doing next year. And then they also, our contractors just expressed a desire to open for Memorial Day, but not announcing it until they know they can be open. So they wouldn't put it necessarily on reservations in January, but if, you know, by May 15th, they're like, oh, everything's clear, we can open. They would like to open for Memorial Day. And then they've also explored the idea of staying open to October 31st to, they see a need for it. So that's something that we can look into next year as far as how to facilitate that. But that's kind of their grand plans.
Please include me in that conversation.
Yes. And then we have our Conservation Trust Fund. So this is directly comes from the state into a separate account from our general fund and has been increasing every year because we get about $6,000 a year. Or actually $6,000, is it a quarter or a year?
Looks to be about more annually.
Okay, and then this can be used for recreational and open space, so. If we had any kind of grant opportunities come up, we could use this as a match.
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask. Like, you know, we did the trail work and we were just waiting for a bridge. Can we use something like this for this?
Yes.
Yeah, great.
This money is sitting there ready for a match.
Or if some of the trail stuff came up in the capital improvements planning, would we think about funding any of it through this? Okay.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the neat thing about the capital improvements. Like prioritization is we could either use it in the capital improvements fund, with the Mullis Lodge, potentially using their own fund or having our own capital improvements. So there's kind of flexibility on where we can, put that, but I will ask, when we do, finalize what we would like that capital improvements line item to be for, it will be, like indemnified in a resolution, basically. I don't know if that's the right term, but, and then moving on to the library fund. So this is that, the library fund, budget is managed by the library board of trustees. And so they submit their budget to us. We kept the transfer out remaining the same at 120,000. They are dipping in a little bit into their reserves. But this is for an increased salary of the library director and an increased line item for their heating. We realize that we keep going over for their heating. So this is something that potentially we might want to look at to make sure that it stays sustainable. But I know that this year, Missy is just on it for grants. So I anticipate a lot more funding from grants coming in because she's very motivated. Nope, and that's all I've got for. Sorry. And that's all I have for our general fund and our enterprise funds. Do you all have any questions on those? How you feeling about it? Guys ready to spend some money down?
I have a bunch of specific questions, but I don't need to jump in if anybody else is. Probably duplicative of what the finance committee already went through, mostly about assumptions and things. Anybody mind if I roll through? All right, so starting back at the top. Very first line item under general fund is the property taxes. Was curious why we're budgeting slightly less in 2023 than in 2022, because it seems, my understanding is that those are fairly stable and would just increase based on, you know, the additional properties that are here, plus the way that the county assessed property taxes last year going into this year, the assessments are much, much higher than they have been in years past.
Yeah, it is interesting. So this number is given to me by the county in their predictions of what their property tax is going, so that 28 million right there, 28 million. That is what we mill levy off of. And Kim Buck did point out that if for some reason it's lower this year, the next year, she will give me a final assessment more towards the end of November. So I get like the first assessment, and then she does any adjustments. I get the final one in November. So that one is kind of given to us by the county.
Okay. Well, I'd be interested to know why it's going down when they figure it out, because it seems like that's something that should be going up kind of exponentially. Cool. So then this one's really tiny, but liquor licenses, I was curious if we thought, I mean, we've lost a couple of liquor licenses in Silverton, so I wasn't sure that seeing that increase.
So what we did here was just take our and I think I budgeted too low last year, and that's kind of why it's down. But what we did was we took how many liquor licenses we currently have and multiplied that by $250 per license, and that's how we came up with that number.
Cool, awesome. All right, my next question was in the notes on lodging fees. I was curious if 38,000 year to date is an alarming number, since our budget is almost double that. And I was wondering if you had any.
Sometimes we don't collect those until people pay them all at once, but they're not a very strict.
So the year to date is really hard to predict on this one.
Okay.
Because
we don't have a set time when people do their lodging fees. And sometimes we get it all at the very end of the year.
Got it. Okay, cool.
So you're not worried is what you're saying.
Well, I just don't know if I can predict anything at this point for the lodging fees.
Okay,
Jim's got his hand up.
Jim?
Yeah, just one quick about that lodging fee. Doesn't that go out monthly?
It should.
Yeah, and Jim, I think we talked about this in the finance committee, and some folks like you pay them monthly. And I just don't think that there was a big, there's not a penalty for not paying them on time monthly. And so I feel like we do get a lot of year end, let's get it all in. I think if you remember, I think maybe that's what we came up with.
That sounds
Gloria,
very familiar.
yes, okay, yeah.
Yeah, I
And
think,
you're working on that.
yeah, I think the consensus was that the policy doesn't have any teeth except for denying a business renewal. So they end up submitting it right before they renew their business.
And then aren't you working on having it something that we could pay through the express bill pay?
That is online. That's been going online since May.
I've been hours looking and I can't figure it out.
I've gotten dozens of payments through that form, so
It'd be great to have like a little tutorial at some point then.
Okay.
Cool.
Oh, we could do a little town of Silverton tutorials.
Nice.
Well, maybe that raising the issue of the lodging tax timing, maybe it's something to take back to the finance committee and brainstorm some.
Well, it would
Ideas?
certainly make it easier for us to budget, but I mean,
what's the burden out there?
yeah, and then how are we gonna enforce it? And then how is staff gonna be able to enforce it? And is it gonna be worth it? Or,
Can we assess like a small interest rate for late payment, like the IRS does what, like 0.5% or something?
Jim's
Or
nodding his head.
like, it doesn't need to be like a punishment
Yeah.
penalty, but just something that's like, it's taking more admin time to like follow up with people.
So a solution that Gloria and I have been looking into has been setting it up an automatic mailer from like a MailChimp. That'll just send all the lodging businesses a reminder email that has the link to the online remittance form. And I think that that might help keep people more up to date.
Cool. I feel really silly that I can't figure this out also, just personally.
It's okay with you. You gave me a great idea of
Okay,
kind of
cool.
Silverton tutorials.
All right, the next question is just a couple down on building permits. I was wondering if we think that if we're only expecting a like marginal increase going into next year, going from 50,000 to 55,000.
And I'm being conservative on that.
Okay.
Not knowing kind of what our economy is going to do next year. I don't want to over commit. In my revenues, I'm very conservative.
Okay, cool.
Well, and I think it's a huge point to note that from 2019 to 2023, it's like doubled. I mean, that's like, again, to your point, John, it's huge that we have to recognize this.
Okay. I was wondering where the IGA expenditure spreadsheet is.
Sure. I can get that to you all. Sorry, I should have included in this one, but we hadn't done our meeting yet for this year, but I can absolutely include that.
Cool. Just for context now, what shared services do we still have? Because I saw, for example, like sheriff department budget is in here as its own thing.
Yep.
But I think is technically a shared service. So I'm curious how, like what's being categorized as a shared service and what is a standalone.
Sure. And I was actually just reviewing that contract. So let me pull it up real quick.
And then also like our planning department's has gone through a shift. So those shared services.
So I've taken those out of our next IGA. But basically what we share right now is our ambulance, fire authority building, fire protection, fire pension, building inspector, code enforcement, carriage house, and insurance. And then we've had in the past transfer station, but that hasn't been paid we haven't split the cost of that in many years.
So
sheriff's law enforcement is not under there anymore. It's its own thing.
Right, it is its own.
Yeah, okay.
and fire department is as well.
Yes.
Okay. So I guess I'd be curious, like what. It seems like that line item's been super inconsistent in years past in terms of what's included or not included.
Mhm.
And so maybe.
And it also depends too on the revenues that we get in from the building inspection. So we get all the revenues in and sometimes we owe them, sometimes they owe us. But I'd be happy, and I kind of think it would be a great idea. And I think Dana, you had suggested this at one point of doing a town-county kind of joint meeting to discuss our IGA and our shared services. If you all would be open to a work session for that.
Well, and to put a little context on it, I thought it would be helpful to just have, if we're looking at a budget for law enforcement or fire department or ambulance or whatever, we're still I feel like I'm only getting half the picture when I'm seeing just what's presented to the town, right? Because they also are presenting a budget to the county. And because we're such a small little entity here, I feel like I would be served by at least having a conversation where we can see globally, what are we talking about? What are these entities providing to our entire community? What is the budget that's being asked of the entire community? Just have a little bit more synergy so we make sure that we're all on the same page and know what we're expecting, what the county's expecting, what the partner who's providing the services is expecting. And so just that seemed helpful in my mind.
Cool. And then I think just specific to just for like administration in this line item, having like a robust clarifying note about what's included and not included would be I think helpful for future years.
Sure, and I have it pulled up if you wanted to see it, but it's not filled out for 2023. Okay, I'll send it out.
Cool.
Oh, and as a related thing to that, I was asking Gloria if maybe we could have on the Google Drive, like somewhere where we think, okay, what are the contracts we have with different entities? What are the MOUs we have with different groups? What is in the IGA? Because I know we can find it buried in a board packet, but that's very challenging to find. Having a Google Drive, it can be just for trustees or it's all public anyways. So having it just available. So we have that transparency and so I can find it if I'm curious. I see you laughing at me, Jim.
It's the best poker face.
Yeah. The next question I have is on page 3 under general fund expense on board. The last item is nonprofit. Jumping from 15,000 to 40,000 because of the budget that we decided to have for nonprofit requests is 30,000.
So, yeah, so this is funny because last year I put them as partners. So that's why you'll see
Okay.
$40,000 in partners.
That was going to be my
And
next
I
question.
realized that wasn't exactly the place where it needed to go this year. So what I did was I put it up in the nonprofit and then in the partners is reduced down to 10,000.
Got it.
From 40,000, and that would include our Region 9, Southwest COG, Skidoring, and I think that line item got cut off, but the kind of just the reoccurring memberships of partners that we have.
I still wondered if ski drawing fit there or if it should fit under nonprofits.
Well, so according to our contract with them, we have until 2023. We are a sponsor of Skidoring until for $5,000 until 2023. So it is a commitment right now. I did talk to them the other day and they are going to submit a nonprofit request as well. So that's kind of why I kept it separate too.
Because they're an entity that we have a recurring contract with for a certain amount versus other groups that come for kind of one time.
Correct. So we kind of allocated that $30,000. I gave you guys 40 in that in case you wanted to keep some for the next year for kind of random requests that come in. But put in that 30 for the nonprofit requests.
Cool. So then comparing the 2022 to 2023 budget of those two line items, we have a net decrease of $5,000. And I was just, which is good, but I was just curious if that.
Yeah, and the great thing is with the combination of Region 9 taking over Southwest COG, our dues went from $5,000 to $1,600. So significantly down. It's great. And also anticipating, I think there's a couple more I need to add to this one. But that decrease was kind of why I was able to bump it down.
Got it. Okay. The next one I have is a few pages back under park maintenance. We still have 15,000 budgeted for 4th of July committee. And I guess that's subject to some further conversations, but it seems like that would potentially go away after we have conversation this evening.
Yep.
Okay.
And I was anticipating that. I wanted to keep it in there until you all told me otherwise.
Okay. And that's all my questions. I had one comment that I was just curious if it's possible. It maybe is a bad suggestion, but it's helpful for me to see change from year to year. Just the most recent year to the current year as a percentage.
Oh, as percentage.
And that way, like, because sometimes like seeing something go from 200 to 1,000 is going to show a huge percentage, but it's like it's highlighting more stuff to just kind of as a quick pass through to see like what's changed dramatically. And I don't know if that's like common practice in municipal finance or not, but for me, that would be a really helpful way to like skim through things quickly and see differences.
Okay.
That's all I got. Tim?
Are you suggesting like a variance column?
Yes.
Because I think that would be extremely helpful.
Great.
Yeah.
I can add that. That's easy.
I had a couple questions in addition to what I brought up at the finance committee meeting. Question on the law enforcement budget. It says 60-40. Do we pay the 60 or do we pay the 40?
I believe we pay, let me just double check though.
Thank you.
I've got about 10 different contracts in my head right now.
Yes.
So make sure I get it.
I'm new to this. I was like, well, I'd like to know.
I believe we pay the 60, but I want to double check. One of their contracts.
Okay. And while you're pulling it up, is there, I had the same question about the 4th of July committee line item. And thinking about the bank charges, I know we talked about it in the finance committee. I know when we do our budgeting, we're always looking for ways to like get rid of annoying fees. And those seem like they were going up. Did you have any more thoughts on if we can?
You know, after that, our accountant went on a little vacation, so I haven't been able to get a hold of her, but that is on my list of questions for her. Because she is really our, okay, so here it is. We do pay the 60%.
Okay, thank you. And then thinking about our marketing and advertising budget, I was thinking too with how the chamber markets and advertises, just kind of, I know a lot of our marketing and advertising you said is going towards like pushing out RFPs and advertising for positions, but just kind of making sure whatever synergies we can have with what the chamber is doing and their approach and their funding, and then whatever our departments are spending.
Sure, and one of the things that we cut in 2021 for 2022 was like our wedding marketing. We cut that significantly last year. And so we're anticipating boosting that up again so that we can get back in those magazines.
Thanks.
Dana made me think of 2 more questions. Should we be budgeting any differently with respect to the visitor center and the chamber based on the Columbine Park visitor center area? Will there be any like shift in like, do we need more from the chamber?
You know, at this point, I would suggest that we anticipate that for next year, especially a larger conversation next year too, on how we want to manage our visitor centers. But for this year, I was kind of keeping it the same. You'll see that I'll have the same contract in front of you all. I mean, pretty similar contract to contracts in the years past for the chamber, for the visitor center. But then next year, definitely reevaluating kind of how we want to see those operate.
Cool. My 2 questions turn into 3. Should we also be budgeting anything for aging in place resources? Because I don't think we have any line items for that.
Well, we do support the senior center.
Yeah.
So in our town modular, we pay for the internet, gas, and electricity. But other than that, we don't have anything else budgeted in here.
What are there other services that small communities provide to the aging portion of the community? Like, you know, for example, the senior center had a subsidy where they could pay someone to shovel for members of the senior center. And I think that went away this coming winter. And so they're going to be relying on volunteers instead of being able to pay people. But that's the type of thing that I think.
And I know they are submitting a nonprofit request as well.
Okay.
Which I should also remind that we did do the clinic as well last year and had discussed possibly doing a line item for the clinic. So maybe as those nonprofit requests come in, we can look at putting them as an actual line item if we need.
Okay.
And that way we'll know what they need as far as the senior center goes.
And putting on my public health part-time employee hat for a moment, you all will actually be getting an update on community health assessment that we did in over the last 6 months. So that has a lot of stuff for needs for seniors, for all healthcare needs in the community. So it can inform that discussion for sure. I think I'm talking next week.
And typically those health and human services are administrated through the county. But if that is a priority of the trustees, then we can allocate money there.
And are there any other underserved aspects of our community that we should be considering building line items for? Like, I mean, Jim knows way more than I do about the food bank, but I don't know to what extent, we provide contributions or support for the food bank, or if we still have a need for that post-COVID. But
we do provide the modular as a space right now for the food bank, and that does include electricity. But other than that, I'm not sure anything else there unless Jim has some context.
General funding and staffing goes through the school.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last one, which was part of the original two, was probably better for some type of like housing workshop, but anticipating budget needs. One of the things that came up at some point in the last year in talking about how we can facilitate both better processes for home builders and also taking some of the demand off of our historic review board and planning commission was to like commission an architect to develop like 10 approved designs or 5 or whatever the number is. So that if someone comes in and chooses one of the pre-approved designs, they can go through an expedited planning process. And I don't know if we should be budgeting for a consultant or architect to help us with that. That seems like it could be a great administrative time saver. We can also create kind of historic uniformity throughout the town without being too uniform.
It just struck me in thinking about the budget. I mean, I think we have a lot of things that are very much aligned to the master plan and our trustee priorities, and like there's a lot of alignment, but it still struck me that there are some strategies, very specific strategies in the master plan that I'm not necessarily convinced that we're funding maybe at the level or capacity that we want to. And again, it may cause trade-offs, and it may be something that we really want to use as a lens for next season. But I just think it's something to keep in mind as we think about all the stuff around like investments in placemaking and trails and conservation easements. I mean, there's just so much stuff in here, infrastructure, supporting local economic incentives, thinking about a lot of vacant homes. I mean, there's so many things we could tackle. But I don't know. I just think we still might want to use some of these strategies as lenses, again, even if it's not for this budget, as we go into the next budgeting season. And I know as you start thinking about programmatic budgeting, just really using these strategies to get the best bang for our buck out of the master plan too.
And I'll be completely honest, this budget is nowhere where I want it to be. As far as presentation goes, as far as breaking it out the line items to be very clear of what we're spending and where. There's a lot of work I have to do on this budget, and I probably won't get it done in a year, but I'm going to try to get some of it. Every year I'm going to try and just do a little bit more to make this a more comprehensive document.
Yeah, just so that there isn't the feeling of too much pressure being put on you. A lot of my questions probably relate more to the next budgeting season. Like the master plan, for example, was just adopted. And it wouldn't have been realistic to expect some like big strategy master plan to get in here, which you've been working on all year. So, like Dana said, I think this may be for.
Oh yeah, I also want to warn you all, like this isn't. I see so much more potential here to be able to present and kind of be able to take it apart too and really able to understand it. So we're getting closer, but we're nowhere near where my expectations are.
Well, and I know there's not a lot of people on Zoom, but hopefully people realize, like, we go through this with a fine tooth comb and we say, hey, can we get our bank charges down? I mean, there's a lot of transparency that is coming, I think, at the town level at least. So that's, hopefully people can appreciate that. If they'd like to go through it line item, they can, it's there.
Anything
It's
else?
exciting. Yeah, any other questions, comments from trustees?
A question for you,
Oh, Sally, you might need to, oh, there you go.
I'm wondering, when are the, oh, sorry. When
We
are
can
the
hear you well.
nonprofit? Oh, my internet's bad. I'm gonna
Are you
ask this
asking-
question and I think, okay. Have nonprofit requests come in yet? And what are they?
We have received three nonprofit requests at this point, and they are not due until the 14th. So at this point, we're not even near, I think we're at $5,000 worth of requests at this point. Does that help?
Thanks. Last year we had really good requests and then we went way over that budget and I just remember wanting to fund everything in it. Shane already talked about the increase in that, how we got to that number in this year's budget. And I think that's great. And then this is just a curiosity. I should know this, but I'll just admit my ignorance. Is there a taxing? And I know that I had the same question as Shane did about the property tax numbers. And I know that's not our greatest revenue source, but is there a taxation difference in developed property versus undeveloped?
I don't know the answer to that.
Like,
but I would
is
assume so.
undeveloped taxed at a different rate than developed property?
Well,
I think so.
yeah,
Right, because
I
it would
don't know the
assess at
answer
a
to
lower
that.
value, right?
right.
I think both, but I could be wrong about the rates, but it's definitely assessed at a lower value.
But I am writing that down to address as a question.
But commercial and residential are taxed at different rates as well.
Hot topic, Columbine Park Info Center. Do we still need to put something in for the landscaping?
I mean, the hardscaping or?
Yeah,
We were looking at pursuing a grant for it, but that's a very real potential, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll get to spend down the budget.
There you go.
Are there any top priorities of department heads that didn't quite make the cut in this budget?
I think we have our top department heads here that spend all the money, so.
I'm pretty happy with the way, with what Gloria and I have come up with for water, sewer, streets. Just start getting into the big stuff like collections, sewer plant. We've got to coat a water tank in the next 2 or 3 years. That's just a lot of money. And a lot of it is kind of out there, like we don't know. We're about to submit this USDA application for the collection system rehabilitation. And they will come up with how much they're going to grant you and how much they're going to loan you. And we may not know that for 3 or 4 months after we. So that's just kind of like, I'm kind of uneasy about that. Like, and then I'll be coming to you saying, well, yeah, they're going to give us $3 million, but we got to come up with $1 million or whatever. We got to figure out how we're going to get another match or another loan somewhere else. But as far as like the bones of operations and maintenance, I feel pretty good about public works budget.
To speak to Parks and Rec, we're really excited about what the department is doing, where it's going and where it's come in the last 5 years. It's grown exponentially every year. We're really finally kind of coming of age on some really large projects that we've had kind of bubbling for quite some time. A lot of staff support. Gloria's been phenomenal in supporting the department and getting us what we needed, because we've always felt like we're catching up, and we feel like we're really, like I said, kind of coming of age, getting the resources we need for our guys to be successful and to provide a higher quality of service to the community. And that's really exciting. We're also, I really kind of started as a subset of the Parks and Rec department and leaned on John and his guys really hard. And we're really, this year in particular, kind of growing into our own and branching off and becoming more of an independent department because we finally have the resources to do so. And we look forward to really kind of raising the bar and providing a higher quality of service in the coming year and many years to come. So really exciting time. As far as large budget asks, we've been able to accommodate pretty much everything that's within reason to give our guys the resources they need to really get to that level of professionalism that we've been trying to attain for quite some time. So really good stuff. And thank you to the trustees for supporting us as well and believing in us and the direction. And we're excited to deliver on some of these large things this year. So
Nice.
You know, I've been thinking about you guys a lot lately because you're like these public facing departments, right? That get a lot of the grief because you're the people out there and your staff is out there. And I just think, you know, there's not that many people listening now. I was just curious, and we have a line item for citizen engagement. And it's something for you guys as staff to come out and glory. The idea around talking about what you're working on, right? Or you have new staff, introducing them to the community so people know the actual face of Public Works and Parks and Rec and know what are priorities to you, what you're working on. Because I know people could look at the budget and say these departments have increased a lot in the last few years. And a thing that struck me as thinking about the budget is making sure that we're getting good value for what we're investing in. And I think we all hear that, but I'm not sure the larger community always gets that story. And it's not part, you know, you guys are not marketing communication guys, but if there's a way with the newspaper to profile some of the staff, I don't know, I'm just brainstorming ideas here, but I just think you get a lot of the criticism, and it would be good to hear some of the things for the community, hear some of the things that are really being worked on and thought about and the value that you're really bringing to the community. So that was just something that came up, because I know you get to often be the whack-a-mole of the staff, so.
That in mind.
A couple more. The entryway monument that we put the RFP out, should we be putting a line item in for some estimated budget for that? Because we would want to pursue that more or less right away after the RFP and design process is complete.
And that's when 2A lumped in with grants.
Okay.
So anticipating getting grant funding for that, and a possible match, we lumped that one in.
Got it. And is there additional planning that we should be budgeting for something kind of similar to what Blair Street's working on over the next few years for Green Street in terms of like the Green Street road surface repairs and maintenance, like sidewalk deterioration, and like keeping it safe, and more stuff related to like the school's request for safety around the school intersections and crosswalks and things like that? Do we need any other line items for those?
Like separate line items other than maintenance.
Okay. Is maintenance you feel sufficient for keeping Green Street safe?
We're gonna need to look at doing a more major Green Street resurfacing the next couple of years, but not next year.
Okay.
And it's a thick asphalt surface designed for heavy use. But it's going to need maintenance, and when it is, it's going to be a bigger ticket kind of thing. We're just kind of dragging that out. As far as other stuff like sidewalk maintenance repair, try to stay on top of it, but it's not, we don't really have that as I haven't really thought about that as like a project. Okay, we're gonna go through and, you know, we fix it when it's broken. And also in our code, it says that the property owners are responsible for their own sidewalk maintenance. So that might be a bigger discussion to kind of keep talking about as far as sidewalk stuff goes. And our sidewalks around town are obviously in a poor state.
Is that,
Off of Green Street.
is that code provision relating to all zoning districts or just certain zoning
I
districts?
believe so. I believe it is. Yeah, that's a good question. It may not apply to Green Street, but I think it applies to every street.
Cool.
And we could look at that. It's a short section of code.
Because that may also just be something that's helpful to like have some process in place for notifying owners whose sidewalks are like dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. We could certainly go in there and pull them out. A guy that works for us, his mother lives in Durango. Durango has a similar policy that they went in and replaced sidewalks and billed the homeowners for the frontage. And that's actually in our code as well, that we can do that. But I think as far as a sidewalk rehabilitation, it's probably a bigger project that we should look at and kind of put, you know, on the list for coming years and say, hey, what would we really like to do with our sidewalks, Green Street, around town, et cetera.
Nice. Like at least, I don't know. In my head, I grouped that in with like urban pathway CIP proposal. I'm not sure if that was within the intended scope, but I kind of was thinking that as part of that capital improvement project.
Yes.
Right. No, I'm really,
Another line item I think about was as Anvil area and that whole area gets more developed, thinking about traffic study or, you know, again, it probably is not this year, but like how kids in that area are getting to the school and just traffic study for next year, or however that gets discussed or thought about for moving people through town. Not for 2023.
Well, in light of Gilbert being here and patiently waiting through this, would you mind if he presented, and then if we had any other questions, we could jump back to him?
absolutely.
Great.
You're very patient. Yeah.
Thanks for having me here. I think all of you have a copy of our fire department budget and stuff. If there's any questions, basically we ended up going about $8,000 in this year's budget. The biggest line items are the grant writer. We're getting grants and we're trying to apply for grants, and we don't have the volunteers to do it anymore. So basically what we have there is we've put $1,750 there to pay somebody to do grants as they come in at $30 an hour. It comes out to about 56 hours a year. It's not much, but we got to get going somewhere to try to get some money or things coming in that we can't afford to buy outright. So that's one of the cost. The technical services is right now we got to do a lot of filing with the state for inference reports, and anything that happens, we got to get the information from dispatch and then get it to the state. And also we've been having meetings with the OEM and stuff like that. And the guys that are attending it, whether it's myself or one of the other officers, we're having to take time off of our work and we don't get reimbursed for that. So it's just to pay the people to be able to attend these meetings and to keep in the loop. I think we're the only ones that have that are there that are strictly volunteers that aren't being paid to have somebody representing us. So those are a couple of the biggest items we have that we increased. Telecommunications is another one. I think everyone knows with the new internet, everything coming up, we're going to be doing more. We're doing a lot of stuff online, a lot of training and stuff. So we're using money there. The training is our biggest increase. We went from the 2,750 for each entity to $5,000 for each entity to train guys. Last year we had 10 firefighters that took firefighter 1 classes and attended fire academy. And we actually spent 17,005 on training last year. We were able to absorb some of that cost with the county helped us out with the sales tax revenue. So we feel that if we increase it to 5,000 per entity this year, we'll be at a good point. So that's our biggest increases. And of course, fuel went up a little bit and things like that, but everything else is pretty much status quo of what we submitted the year before. So our operating budget is $49,900 per entity. The county will receive the exact same contract that you guys are, with us being the fire authority. It's basically, you're doing a service of we're doing a contract service with you folks. We're providing fire protection for the town of Silverton, and you're providing us with $49,900 in operating cost. And then with that, there's $10,000 set aside that I believe goes through the intergovernmental agreement for the escrow account. So each entity puts $10,000 aside that goes into the county escrow for new equipment, just like when we bought the fire truck, we took $160,000 out of our escrow account for our portion of our match. So that was basically depleted, and now we're rebuilding the escrow account. And then each entity puts in 15,000 into the fireman's pension fund, as well as the county puts 15,000 from the sales tax into that. So that's 45,000 that goes into the fireman's pension fund, and then DOLA gives us a match on that. They give us about $20,000 that they match what the town, county, and the sales tax funds are. So that goes all into the fireman's pension plan. Everybody has to put a minimum of 10 years. You're vested in it 10 years. If you put 20 years in, you get $175 a month when you retire. You have to be 59 to retire. So what we're trying to do is next year we'll have an actuarial study again. And what the fireman's pension fund will do is look at it, and we'll give them a couple options saying we want to go to $200, $225, or $250. And then they'll tell us what the fund will support. So what we're hoping is if we could get this incentive up, we could get more volunteers to participate and buy into being volunteers. And when they do retire, there's a little bit something there. For instance, Cortez Fire Department right now, if you put 20 years in, you get $750 a month after you put your 20 years in. So we got some catching up to do. We started late, but if we could get this and continue it growing, that's going to be big for the community and for the volunteers. So that's kind of our operating budget, like says 49, and then we got the 10,000 for escrow and 15,000 for pension fund. Anybody have questions on the operating budget or pension fund or escrow account?
Have you found, like, have you been above budget, below budget?
We basically, when we end up at the end of the year, we end up just about even with budget. We end up expending all of our funds. We do carry a $15,000 savings account for if we do go over budget, so that we have some money to fall back on. So like last year, like I said, over the training and different costs, we went over budget, but we were able to pull out of our reserves to still keep us afloat. And that's why we're adding some of these items in, because of the fact that we were pulling money from other budget items to try to pay people for man hours worked and stuff. And then I guess the next question is the fireworks. We were asked to try to come up with something, and it was brought to our attention. Maybe we could put 30. The town gave us 34,000 for fireworks this year. We, fire department, or the Friends of the Fire Department, have saying that they'll put 4,000 into the fireworks fund next year. So we would be asking, that's why it's reduced from 34 to 30. And we just feel that if all of us have a piece of it, the town, the county pays our insurance to be up on the hill. The town's giving us money. We get the 4th of July committee involved. The fire department's involved. It's not so much a fire department event, it's a community event. And we're just trying to put the event on for the community. So that's kind of how it's panning out. And like I said, we're willing to put $4,000 into it ourselves to help with it.
So I was hoping to figure out a way for this to be, I support the $30,000 contribution by the town to the fire department. But I prefer for it to be reflected in the budget in some way where it's not specifically allocated to fireworks, because what I think that does is, like, let's say we only get to set them off every 4 out of 5 years. That 5th year, you then would still have the $30,000, and the following year you'd have $60,000 in the fireworks budget, whereas you could put that 30 towards your pension fund to get towards your goal faster. Or if in the future, you know, you do have excess budget in there and you can buy bulk or something and prices come down, or if you at some point in the future wanted to reduce the total length of the show or anything like that, it'd be totally in your discretion to choose how to use those funds rather than having them accrue, or if we have like a high fire danger year.
Right.
I just think it would be easier for me to say yes, if there was some discretion in how those funds are used and they weren't specifically allocated to fireworks, because I'd love to see your pension grow faster, or you know, to have more budget sitting aside for deferred maintenance on vehicles or building or other things like that.
Right. And I think that'd be a great way to do it. I think if we could get to that point, I think, because all of us were looking at page 8 where that 15,000 is still allocated to the 4th of July committee, it's actually would be a $15,000 increase in the town budget. And the fire department would be working with the 4th of July committee with them and getting a contract with them to pay the labor to shoot the show. So that wouldn't be a burden on the town, but 15,000 from the 4th of July committee and apply it to this, then it's a $15,000 increase instead of the 30,000. But I agree with you, if we could do that. And I mean, if the board wanted to put the stipulations that if there was no fireworks, that it go to Pacific, or we could use it for pension or something like that, I think that would be great. I think that's what we need to try to do.
I think my hope when we had the discussion for this year, and obviously we were facing a time frame of purchasing firework product or not, was to increase the fire department budget, but to then give you the discretion. And so I think it's a little hard for me to see a fire department budget request increase every year with the addition of the fire department budget, including the fireworks as a discretionary item. And so I would love to see a way for the fire department to prioritize at their members' desire, you know, how the funds get spent, but hoping that future increases could be absorbed, reallocated within the amount that's being given for the fireworks, because the town did increase the budget. But for me, the real hope was that it then becomes discretionary and the members and the fire department decides how that gets spent. Quantity of fireworks, to Shane's point, you know, if it builds up over a year, if we're not having a fireworks show that one year, then the budget request to us doesn't necessarily increase because you're able to absorb that budget increase with accumulating fireworks funds or that same amount over the time. There, but just giving you more discretion that it can go towards fireworks, or it can also go towards building up reserves if that's a necessary thing for, you know, training, increased costs or things like that, but giving you more discretion for your members to make that decision.
And I think that would be great. Like I said, just like last year was one of them years where we got a bunch of new members and we got 10 guys that wanted to go to firefighter 1 class. We hadn't had that in several years.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden you get something like that, and it'd be where we could use funds like that to train people that are going to make it better for the community than, because the funds are already there in place or could be available.
Yeah. Yeah, I think as a trustee, I'll have a hard time if we continue to allocate $30,000 to fireworks and we see a budget request increase every year. That to me kind of defeats the purpose of giving the discretionary funds to, allocate how you see fit for the next year. But that's my perspective. I don't speak for the whole board.
The only thing I would say is if it's completely discretionary, then you all obviously don't have to shoot a show, but I don't think we have to worry about that because you've always taken so much pride in doing it. So
Yeah, and I think that's.
if fire conditions allow, it's gonna go.
Mhm. And like I said, the fire conditions, all that is managed by Bruce.
Yeah.
He's a fire marshal, so he makes that decision, not us, so it'd still be the same
Mhm.
process.
And Gilbert and I were talking, we don't have like a formal contract. Typically, it's the approval of the budget basically has been our contract in the past, and it's something that we're definitely open to as far as like an MOU or some kind of contractual agreement if you all desire.
This isn't in the IGA.
It is in the IGA. It's a blurb in the IGA. It's not directly with the fire authority.
Is it problematic to make the $30,000 discretionary? From the town's perspective, because it isn't like a specific budget, like rather than calling it a fireworks line item, it's just discretionary funding.
I mean, we do a lot of discretionary funding, so I don't see any issues, but I can definitely look into that and ask Clayton if there's like, especially if you're contracting with someone, if we need to provide that service. Going through our last audit makes me question those things as well.
Because another thought is, like it would be awesome to move away from having to spend any of the dollars on fireworks, not because we wouldn't have them, but because there could be other fundraising efforts done throughout the year by the 4th of July Association or whoever, potentially to come up with the full 64,000 or whatever the total show costs. And then you still would have this line item in your budget to spend however you'd like.
Right. And I think that's it. I think, as time goes on and maybe as the 4th of July committee or whoever's taking the fundraising over, I think there's a lot of ways, with GoFundMe accounts. And I think if right after the show, if there's a big push to collect money after everybody sees it, then that's when you would get your funding, and it wouldn't take really that much to get it done. And I think, if each business and stuff like that, they start donating like they used to in the past, I think the donation part of it could actually start covering the whole cost of the show.
And actually, I'm thinking of that question further. If we just had an MOU or something that laid out that that's how much we were going to pay them, I think that would suffice for the audit.
Okay.
Kind of a budget adjacent question. What's been our retention and recruitment rate with, you said you trained about a whole bunch of new people last year. Have we been able to keep them around?
Well, it's just, we're hoping to keep everybody around. It's just kind of gonna, comes down to how many hours a guy can do voluntarily. And the biggest thing that hurts us is the employers can't afford. In the past, they would pay us. If you left work, you were paid to go volunteer and fight fires and stuff like that. Now they can't afford it, and the guys can't afford to miss work. So it creates kind of a problem right there. But like I said, the group of guys we've got 31 guys on the fire department, and
There's a
go ahead. No.
state statute that protects against that.
Yeah.
If you're a volunteer firefighter, you leave work to go fight a fire, they cannot pay you.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah. Because we have the same thing for our volunteers, because we still have 65% volunteers. If they leave work, and they're out, doing something, their employer has to pay them X percentage of the rest of the day. I don't know if that's new. I just read that earlier this year, but I'll send it over to you. But also, whether or not it's enforceable is a whole different.
Right. you know, like I said, most of the guys are pretty good about it and they're just, I mean, like I said, the hours they're putting in right now through the end of this quarter, we have about 3,600 hours that have been volunteer hours. And that's not counting the 1,000 hours for the fireworks show. So it's a big commitment. By the time that we're done at the end of the year, we're going to have right at 5,800, 6,000 hours of voluntary time that's been put into it. And the guys will end up getting a couple hats, a couple t-shirts, and hopefully a free meal. We'll do a caterer meal, and that's the incentive that's in there. That's at $2,800. That's what we give the guys a year for volunteering their time.
I think it's super helpful to know that. I don't know if this is possible for future budgeting cycle or presentation is, knowing number of new recruits, volunteer hours. Like, I think it just gives a picture to the community what service they're getting from this group. And so that, I don't know if I'm alone in requesting that, but just, number of guys you expect to retire, number of new members, number of hours, that'd be really helpful.
And usually once after the quarter ends, we'll send a statement to Gloria showing that the percentage of the budget that we've used and the hours that we have accumulated for that. So, we'll continue to do that. There'll be one coming out in the next 2 weeks to end this third quarter, and then we'll have one at the end of the year as a final.
Yeah, that'd be great to hear, kind of an annual report or something.
Right.
I guess it's just brings up another question about maybe future budgets and things, but how much focus do you guys have on wildland stuff right now? And in the future, do we need to start developing more of a wildland group as well?
Basically, we got about 4 guys that are wildland trained. We don't really deal with it much because most of it's all federal land. So once we get to the fire and then it's turned over to BLM or Forest Service. So that's kind of how we just kind of deal with it. With the ice fire, we showed up. We kind of assessed as soon as BLM Forest Service got there, it gets turned over to them. But we do training on it, and guys do have red cards and stuff like that. So
I bet there's a lot of red cards hidden in houses in this town. I have a red card. I'm a wildland.
It's things we're working on right now is we're working with the police department from Austin, Texas, and they're going to be giving us a drone and getting us certified, all the equipment, everything we need so that we'll be able to, when we're getting these calls up around Aspen Town and stuff like that, we'll just be able to send a drone up there. We'll have a camera on it, heat sensors, and we're working with them and they're going to donate all this equipment to us. So we're looking at hopefully probably about $75,000 to $100,000 of equipment, and they're going to get us certified and everything, and we'll have our pilot license. So that's what we're working on also. So there's a lot of things that it's just not the fire side of it that we work with and that we try to get going. So I think, once you get that drone, it'll be useful for motor vehicle accidents, people over the edge. We could see what we need. We could assess stuff better. It'll be useful for search and rescue, anybody that's around. So it's going to be something that the community will be able to use, and it'll be a benefit to the community.
Nice.
That's cool. I'm a Part 107 pilot, so it's another thing where it's like, it's cool to hear this stuff, and I don't hear much of it, so I'd like to know more because I might be able to help out in different ways.
Okay. And it's open. Every Tuesday we do truck checks and training up at the fire station at 5 p.m. Whoever wants to come by, it's open, and walk people through what we're doing and bring people up to date on what we're doing. So if you're around every Tuesday, 5 p.m., we're there and it's open to the public.
Is there anything else the town could be doing that would be helpful?
No, I think right now the fire department's, sitting in a pretty good spot. I think everything we have is, we have a couple aging trucks that will be, once we get this new one paid off, we'd be looking at replacing, and the building's doing great. Building the mezzanine with the offices and stuff has helped a bunch. So we got, one of the things we're looking at is trying to upgrade our ladder truck to a newer model. That's an 81, and we want to get one with a basket on it. So you could do more rescues and you could do more things. It'd be 100-foot stick instead of a 75-foot stick. So we'd be able to reach the buildings better and stuff like that. So those are some of the things we're working on now, and just watching through auctions and departments that are upgrading and seeing if we could find something that we could afford and purchase to make it better. So it definitely wouldn't be a brand new one, but it'd be newer than an 81. So, and when we got this truck, the last truck that we had, we donated it to a fire department in Idaho that their newest truck was a 1964. So we sent that to them and they're getting use out of it. So I think everybody helps each other with what we can. Okay. But if there's anything I need to work with, or the fire department does with the fireworks or anything like that, whatever we have to do, I can meet with Gloria or whoever. And it'll be mostly Jerry Chambers will be the contact person doing all that. He's going to be taking over the 4th of July. So I'm just kind of here for the budget side of it.
Because he's not retiring.
I'm not retiring. I'm retiring from the fireworks.
Yeah.
Fireworks, Jerry's taking over that, but I'm gonna stay with the department for a little longer anyway, so.
Don't spread any town rumors. Town is notorious for rumors.
Yeah. So like I've been starting my 46th year now with the fire department, so. Been there a while and still enjoy it, so. Like I said, any of these meetings, if you need us to come to talk about budget, how we're spending our money after you get our quarterly reports, we're more than willing to come to the meeting and talk about it.
I don't think I've been getting those, so we can talk afterwards on making sure that we have the right emails and stuff.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming.
Okay. Thank you guys for your time. Enjoy your night.
Thanks, Gilbert. Any additional direction after the presentation?
I've got another thing now at 7, so 7. This is right.
Yeah.
You got 6 minutes.
Shut.
I think we might have nailed it. I mean, do we have more discussion or questions or thoughts?
There is one, so the sheriff wasn't able to present tonight, but he's going to be able to present on the 10th, as well as the chamber as well. Did you all want to do that as a work session prior, or did you want to do that as part of the adoption of the draft budget?
Seems like we should be uniform and do that as a work session prior so that everyone's treated the same.
Would you all be available? Would we want to do an hour maybe prior, and we'll just do a half hour on each, if that works for you all?
That's next, a week from today.
Yeah, so that's on the 10th.
That's
And-
six.
An hour before our regular.
6 o'clock work session?
Like do a 6 o'clock session and then our meeting.
Would that work for y'all? Jim, Sally? Okay.
And I guess that was a larger question I had about community partners or shared services is like, do they give kind of an annual report or show financials, or like, what do we expect from these partners, or what do they typically do?
I can say I have to give an annual report to the county
Mhm.
for the ambulance, but that's because folks have to be open anyway because we're a 501c3. I'm more than happy to give the report that I give to the county, which is coming up. It can be very long and very tedious. Our budget is not quite as simple as the fire departments, but or you could come to the county commissioners meeting, watch it, then I wouldn't have to do it twice, but
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking more about the folks that actually get funding, or what would you as a trustee, Tyler, like? You are both a service provider and.
like,
trustee.
I've
What
never
would you like
seen a my time here, I don't think I've seen the sheriff do a. I don't know if I missed the meeting but has he? So, yeah, I guess I'd like to see the sheriff. Gilbert's here every year.
I mean, the sheriff's come and done a budget presentation.
Has he?
Yeah.
I think again, like annual report, number of calls, number of staff, what did you provide? What are we getting for our money? What are we paying for? I don't know.
I thought Dana's request for like an operational report would also be super helpful, and it could or could not be tied to the budget time
Yeah,
of year.
yeah.
But I like your idea of like, how many staff do we have? How many is new? How many retired? Like, how many calls do we have? Like,
Yeah, I just think it's a big black box.
And the thing, and with the sheriff's department specifically, I would like to see the difference between the county and the town, because I think maybe the town pays more than the sheriff.
That's what Tyler's done.
what? What do you mean, Sally?
Wait, that was me speaking, but I'm confused.
I think Tyler's presentation last year is a really good model for the shared services presentations.
I don't know. We're talking about increased transparency and accountability, and I feel like I don't know what we're paying for personally. But
I've got a
also
really good
do.
blueprint I can share with the other agencies, but I can't make them do it.
But we can.
Or no? So there's really, the tough part is that there's really no teeth. Because we can't withhold funding because these are emergency services that we rely on. So it's kind of like a good neighbor, like honor system.
You only rely on fire department. There's no other critical infrastructure requirements for a town.
I mean, if
just by the law.
But if we had some crazy altercation in town without a sheriff's department that was actively serving because we were withholding budget, we would be in a tough position.
It would be a bad look.
So I'm just saying that like our only mechanism for forcing some type of additional transparency is to withhold budget, but withholding budget, I think, hurts us more as much as it hurts them. So it's not really a helpful thing. So it's more just about building the relationship and asking nicely, I think.
And it's never a bad idea to give a good blueprint so that there's something to work off of, because it might be super foreign.
Yeah, maybe like even it would be a staff, additional staff responsibility, but like maybe we can come up with templates that they fill out as opposed to asking, and that way we get a more quality services.
That helps change management. Yeah.
Obviously, we've been doing it like this for years, so it's not urgent and it doesn't need to be like displace other top priorities, but I do think that maybe that's a way that we could facilitate this.
Jim like that idea.
Super into it.
Jim, you're gonna make the template, right?
I think that's a good suggestion, and I would also say like contractor looking at that and making them more conformed with each other. Like some of them we have reporting requirements and other ones we don't. So maybe we want to and that's something too, I'm looking at all our contracts right now to make sure that, well, they're a mess right now, so we do need to clean those up. I'll be completely honest.
Yeah.
But that's an opportunity there, is looking at those reporting requirements and making it conform across all of our entities.
Any final words of wisdom, Jordan?
No. Tonight.
Any last thoughts? Any last requests for direction or clarification?
No, so I'll kind of work with what the notes that I've taken and then highlight those changes on October 10th. So you guys can see them in the first draft of the budget. And then after that, we can do iterations to the budget. I don't want you to think that that's the final approval. It's just the state requirement at that point. And we can tweak it all the way up till December 13th or 12th. So.
Cool.
Jim was.
Jim?
Hey, a quick question, just going back a couple minutes.
I just sent him a message saying. Late.
Say a report does come back with, I'm sorry?
You're good, sorry.
Your internet's
okay.
just breaking up a little bit, but go ahead.
I'm sorry. My question was, if any of these reports come back where more activity is in the county than in the town, does that affect the funding as far as the town-county split, or does it become 60-40? Does it go from 50-50 to something different? How does that work? Or is it just a fixed, that's it?
Right now, it's just fixed.
Okay.
But that would be something that if you guys wanted to discuss further and explore, we could explore that.
My initial thought is that would be a negotiation with the county when the IGA comes up to be renewed. And we would have data to back it up at that point. If we had these reports. Cool.
Okay.
All good?
Yep.
All right, looking ahead, we've got the 10 a.m. liquor license training course tomorrow morning. There's a personal and ordinance committee meeting on Wednesday at 2:30, and then we have our work session that we just scheduled at 6 p.m. on Monday the 10th, and then a regular meeting at 7 p.m.
Yep.
And that's everything I'm aware of. Time is 7:03 p.m. and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
We're ready.